Hi everyone, welcome to the 102 Hours YouTube channel. Tonight we're going to talk about the story of the Green River Killer. You've settled in, perhaps with a blanket drawn up around your shoulders, and already you feel that tickle at the back of your neck, because you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time down in the comments so we can see where in the world we're all whispering from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Green River Killer Case, Gary Ridgway, Washington State's most notorious serial murderer, told in second-person ASMR. Are you ready? Let's begin. You trudge along the muddy bank of the Green River, the moonlight fractured by overhanging branches, when you notice something out of place, a pale form half buried in the silt. The water laps at her ankles, and as you crouch closer, your flashlight beam dances over her features, tangled hair, open eyes staring emptily at the sky. You feel the damp chill seep into your bones. It's November of 1982, and this is the day the nightmare begins. Investigators still question whether this teenager was truly the killer's first victim, or if earlier crimes went unnoticed. A crisp wind carries the faint scent of pine and something else, something metallic. You lean in, catch your breath against the cold air, and realize how utterly alone you are. This wasn't supposed to be your late-night stroll, now it's the epicenter of a horror that would haunt Seattle for decades. Back in 1975, the FBI formalized the term serial killer after studying cases like Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy, men whose crimes shocked the nation. By contrast, the Green River Killer operated in the shadows, targeting vulnerable women and evading capture for nearly 2 decades. Some locals believed the river itself whispered warnings. Folklore said spirits wandered those banks, seeking vengeance. Fringe theory has it that Ridgway sometimes carved cryptic symbols into driftwood, though no proof has ever been found. Investigators still question whether he was taunting searchers with those alleged markings. Your flashlight flickers, and you notice how the water's surface seems to ripple in slow motion, as if reluctant to reveal more. Do you hear that faint splash? Or is it your pulse pounding in your ears? A single police cruiser pulls up, its headlights strobing through the trees. Officers pile out, cords of radios crackling. You're ushered back, warned not to contaminate the scene. Yet every crime scene is its own puzzle, and this one holds the key to a nightmare that will claim at least 49 lives. You can't help but wonder, how could someone remain hidden for so long? Investigators still question whether early murders, left unsolved in nearby counties, were linked until later reviews. That uncertainty fuels the phantom fear that more bodies might lie undiscovered. You step off the beaten path before dawn breaks, the sky still brews dark, and you almost trip over the broken twigs and discarded cigarette butts that litter the riverbank. Not one body this time, but 2, found within a week of the first, their poses eerily similar. You feel that tight coil of dread in your chest, because this isn't an isolated tragedy, it's a pattern. As you shine your flashlight across the scene, you notice the victims lie with arms folded across their stomachs, legs slightly splayed, as if arranged. The damp earth around them has been churned up by hasty footsteps. You realize you're witnessing the birth of a serial predator's grim signature. In the early 1980s, the term serial killer was still fairly new to law enforcement, popularized by FBI agents John Douglas and Robert Ressler after they studied Ted Bundy and other high-profile cases. Yet by late 1982, Washington state detectives were staring at a shadowy murderer who seemed to know exactly how to evade capture. The Green River case would become one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. You crouch beside the second victim, inhaling the metallic tang of exposed earth. A few yards downstream, police officers trample through ferns and reeds, their boots sinking into mud that squelches with every step. Flashbulbs from news crews puncture the gloom, kaleidoscopic bursts against a backdrop of whispering trees. Somewhere nearby, someone murmurs over a radio, possible linking factors, same type of clothing, same riverbank geometry. Investigators still question whether the killer scouted these spots weeks in advance or improvised on the fly. Your breath puffs out in ghostly clouds as you follow the officers upstream to where a third victim was discovered at twilight, her ankles bound, faint bruises on her wrists. The forensics team carefully bags a scrap of nylon cord. The cord's weave differs slightly from the second victim's binding, suggesting the killer swapped tools or perhaps took souvenirs. Fringe theory holds that he kept mementos from each body, though no cash was ever recovered. By 1983, the FBI had rolled out its Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, a national database intended to link similar murders across jurisdictions. But the Green River victims lay in King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties, and local agencies were slow to share reports. It wasn't until bodies began surfacing in garbage-strewn woods miles apart that detectives realized a single hand was at work. You stand at the edge of a muddy clearing where the fourth victim was found. Dry leaves crackle underfoot. A discarded heel lies nearby, ankle-deep in muck, a haunting breadcrumb. You imagine the killer pausing to admire his handiwork, or perhaps to clean his blade. The air tastes faintly of gasoline and pine resin. Somewhere a car engine idles, it could be yours, or his. Your pulse hammers. Victim after victim, the profiles converge, young women with troubled pasts, some hitchhiking, others working the streets. The killers seemed to favor the late-night hours when the riverbanks were deserted. Each body was disposed in shallow water, likely to slow decomposition and hinder identification. A mainstream fact, in 1982, only about 1 in 5 unidentified bodies were ever matched to missing persons reports, making the killer's disposal tactic alarmingly effective. You move to the fifth recovery site, an abandoned logging road scarred by tire tracks. The corpse lies face down, head turned toward the river's swirl. You note a faint pattern in the mud, repeated footprints suggesting the killer paced back and forth before slipping the body into the water. Local myth whispers that some victims were found with wildflower petals placed over their faces, a morbid signature, though no petals were ever documented in official reports. As autumn shifts to winter, the Green River killings slow, then stop altogether, only to resume months later in more remote locations. That break frustrated investigators, who initially hoped it signaled an end. Instead, the lull proved the killer was refining his methods, learning where search parties wouldn't look. He borrowed from crime novels and police textbooks, adapting disposal techniques to exploit jurisdictional boundaries. You picture the investigators huddled in conference rooms, maps strewn across tables, saxophone jazz on a scratched vinyl record, working through the night. Coffee cups stack up, fatigue dulls vigilance. Yet every discovery forces them to sharpen their focus. Their task, decipher the killer's evolving blueprint. By mid-1984, detectives from multiple counties launched joint task forces, exchanging sketches, victim lists, and crime scene photos. Yet the killer remained a phantom. He watched from the shadows as investigators mounted stakeouts and staked their hopes on undercover decoys. A few suspects were questioned, but each had alibis airtight enough to send them home. You traced the river's meander with your finger on a damp topo map, noting each pinpoint, the first 6 bodies, now 8, soon a dozen. The cluster stretches nearly 40 miles upriver, painting a portrait of lethal precision. Each new find reinforces the grim realization, this is no random spree. It's a chilling pattern drawn in water and blood. That constellation would haunt law enforcement for years. Yet in these early days, you can almost feel the collective dread taking root in Seattle's psyche. Every jogger becomes suspect, every parked car, a covert hideaway. The city holds its breath, waiting for the next victim to surface. You step into a dimly lit interview room at the county sheriff's office, clutching a folder stuffed with victim profiles. Each file bears a name, some real, some Jane Doe, but they thread together like notes in a macabre symphony. You flip through photographs, a young woman in a denim jacket, her expression glazed by exhaustion, another in torn work boots, strands of hair plastered to her forehead, a teenager fleeing an abusive home, clutching a backpack she never had a chance to unpack. These aren't just bodies, they were lives ripped from the margins of society and dumped along the Green River's edge. In the late 1970s, police nationwide often categorized sex workers as high-frequency missing, delaying active searches. Statistics show nearly 80% of female victims in serial murder cases during that era fit that label. The Green River victims reflected this bias. 19 of the 49 confirmed victims were sex workers or hitchhikers, struggling for survival on Seattle's fringes. Mainstream fact: during that period, local jurisdictions rarely shared missing person lists, meaning women like these often vanished from one county's radar before another could flag their disappearance. You trace a flickering map of recovery sites, noticing that many of the women were last seen near Interstate 5 and downtown bus stops. Some vanished after clocking out of late-night shifts at bars, others hopped rides with strangers to reach less costly neighborhoods. Investigators still question whether the killer scouted transit hubs or simply trailed vulnerable targets as they made their way home. Among the profiles is Wendy Caulfield, 18, a high school dropout with a talent for singing in church choirs. Her folder holds newspaper clippings of her choir award and proud graduation portraits, dreams crushed when her body surfaced on a November morning. Fringe accounts whisper that Ridgway once stalked Christmas concerts, using holiday music to mask his footsteps, though no official report confirms a concert connection. Another file catches your eye: Lori Forrest, 16, who ran away to escape strict parents. She'd sent postcards to her aunt from Portland, promising to return for summer camp. Instead, her body was found in reeds, ankles clad in borrowed sneakers. Local rumor suggested she left cryptic messages carved into driftwood, supposed love letters, though search teams never documented any carvings. You imagine her last moments, hopeful plans turned to desperation. You leaf to the next dossier: Shirley Sherrill, 23, working 2 jobs to pay rent and support her younger brother. She was last seen texting her roommate about weekend plans after a late shift in Auburn. Fringe whispers claim Ridgway listened to her voicemail for days, studying her voice to learn her routines, though no evidence of phone tampering was ever recorded. How intimate and invasive that stalking must have felt. Jessica Cole, 24, hailed from a small Indiana town, chasing freedom in Seattle's neon night. She loved neon signs and thrifting vintage jackets. Snapshots show her beaming under a pink open light. Mainstream fact: by the early 1980s, most police precincts lacked coordinated missing person bulletins, so Jessica's disappearance didn't register until her body surfaced weeks later. Investigators still question whether dozens of other young women reported missing in King County were also his victims, undiscovered in unmarked graves or remote brush. You close the folder and feel the hush of the room, the ticking clock pressing against your skull. Each profile, each face, reminds you these women had hopes, college applications, holiday plans, dreams of escape. They were real people, not statistics, yet their names often vanished into dusty case files. A quick scan reveals others: Beverly Washington, 17, desperate to pay for art school; Carol Sell, 19, saving for a new apartment; and Sandra McCutcheon, 20, fresh out of nursing school. Their lives diverged on the riverbanks, some clothed in thrifted jackets, others in borrowed coats. Each name is a sharp reminder that the killer chose more than a river, he chose a cross-section of human vulnerability. Mapping the victims, detectives noted clusters near desolate logging roads and rubber-roofed motels. Some think Ridgway chose sites with memorial wooden crosses to taunt investigators, a fringe myth with no corpses discovered under those markers. The clusters stretch from Auburn through Kent, grazing the outskirts of Seattle before petering out near Monroe. You tuck the profiles away and step toward the window. Streetlights glow in distant haze, and you realize the killer's hunting ground was more than geography, it was a network of human desperation, a web of vulnerable lives. And you're standing right at its center. You settle onto a squeaky vinyl press stool inside the Seattle Times newsroom, midday sun slanting through Venetian blinds and illuminating rows of ringing telephones and clacking typewriter keys. You lean in, breathing in the sharp tang of fresh newsprint and overhearing reporters shout over wire updates. Today's assignment: feed the public's ravenous curiosity about a terror lurking just beyond their front doors. The Green River case has exploded into headlines, and you're here to witness the media frenzy that transforms tragedy into top-page sensation. As you watch the bulletin board, you notice red markers clustering around each new discovery. Front-page alerts demand more ink and airtime. In 1983, major metropolitan newspapers nationwide averaged more than 50 column inches daily on crime reporting, reflecting a growing obsession with violent crime in the post-Watergate era. That cultural shift primed audiences to devour every lurid detail, fueling editors to amplify the Green River story at every opportunity. The city's pulse quickens when the Seattle Post-Intelligencer runs a banner headline, "Green River Killer Strikes Again." You picture commuters pressing their faces to bus windows, scanning block letters illuminated against a drizzly backdrop. Television crews converge on riverbanks in vintage Ford Broncos, spotlights slicing through mist, microphones thrust at trembling witnesses. Radio hosts interrupt smooth jazz with breathless bulletins, reading victim names and pleading for tips. Investigators still question whether that sensational coverage hampered the manhunt by flooding tips with thousands of dead-end leads. Meanwhile, late-night talk shows debate every gruesome nuance, turning seasoned detectives into reluctant celebrities. You drift over to the copy editor's desk, where she arranges photographs, a young woman in a faded parka, her eyes closed as though asleep, another clad in work boots, tangled in willow branches. The editor snaps a rubber band around the prints and slides them under a heavy glass plate for the engraver. That image will soon accompany breathless columns speculating on the killer's motive, style, and next move. Fringe chatter circulates among journalists that someone mailed a half-eaten chocolate bar to the city editor with a note reading "Hungry for more kills," though no evidence ever substantiated the claim. You shiver at the thought of black market bravado seeping into the newsroom. Television news directors vie for exclusive interviews. A riverbank hiker spotted strange footprints at dawn, a fisherman nearly tipped his canoe over a hidden shape. You imagine camera lights trained on twitching reeds and muddy trails, crafting dramatic slow-motion reveals. In one broadcast, a weatherman pauses mid-rain check to caution viewers to lock your doors before segueing into torrential downpour footage. Mainstream fact: by mid-1983, local TV stations had increased their nightly crime segments by nearly 30% compared to just 5 years earlier, driven by record ratings for investigative reports. Seattle stations weren't immune. Viewership soared whenever the Green River story broke, cementing crime journalism as primetime fodder. You overhear an anchor practicing his lines. Tonight, the Green River killer's chilling pattern expands to the outskirts of Kent and Auburn. His tone is silky, almost comforting, as if narrating a nature documentary. Yet the subject could not be more horrifying. Between takes, he cracks a nervous smile, reminding himself this is just a job. You wonder how many reporters lose sleep debating the ethics of turning human horror into ratings gold. A veteran crime reporter sidles up beside you, cigarette smoke curling around her head. She murmurs about death fatigue, the public's craving for new angles when the caseload stagnates. She's already drafted a sidebar on community vigilante groups forming night patrols, complete with blurbs on reconstructed journals of fear. You peek at her screensaver, a weathered sketch of the riverbank superimposed with victim markers. Radio DJs drop somber piano licks behind "Caller please, if you know anything, speak now," they plead, voice trembling over static. You can almost hear the collective heartbeat of a city under siege, each broadcast a pulse quickener. Fringe forums whisper that someone hacked the talk show phone lines, leaving cryptic, distorted messages that mimicked a child's voice, though no station ever confirmed these eerie interruptions. Investigators still question whether the barrage of tips, some sincere, many hoaxes, burdened detectives more than it helped them. You imagine mountains of index cards tagged with every rumor, clogging precinct files and diluting credible leads. On the printed front page, the tagline reads, "Seattle's silent predator, are you next?" You imagine stapling that headline above your desk as a grim reminder of the story you're chasing. A reader's comment printed on the letter page warns, "I haven't walked alone since '82." That personal confession underlines how media can reshape daily life, turning city streets into gauntlets of fear. Mainstream fact: a 1984 Gallup poll showed that 65% of Americans rated crime as the top issue facing their communities, up sharply from just 40% in 1979. The Green River coverage tapped into that national anxiety, reinforcing a sense of vulnerability that transcended Seattle. As presses roll and broadcasts fly across the airwaves, you realize the media frenzy has become its own character, a restless force that chases the killer and the public in tandem. Each breaking story feeds the next, in a loop of terror and fascination. And you, hunched over your notepad, are both scribe and spectator, caught between the need to tell the truth and the temptation to stoke the fire. You slip out of the forensic lab's fluorescent glare and step into a small, windowless conference room, its walls plastered with maps and victim timelines. A hush settles over the assembled detectives as an FBI agent taps the chalkboard, sketching a rudimentary personality profile in chalky scrawls. You feel the air thicken with anticipation. This is the moment when crime-solving transforms into psychological intrigue. In 1972, the FBI formalized its behavioral science unit at Quantico, pioneering the practice of criminal profiling to predict offender behavior, a technique still in its infancy when the Green River killings began. Now, with 7 bodies behind them, local investigators lean on the federal experts to sketch the mind behind the massacre. You lean forward, tracing the agent's flickering chalk lines. They describe 2 broad categories: organized killers who plan meticulously, and disorganized ones who act on impulse. Your pulse quickens as the agent circles keywords: controlled, ritualized, mobile disposal. This killer doesn't scatter limbs randomly. He stages bodies in shallow water to slow decomposition. That points to an organized offender. Investigators still question whether the Green River case truly fits those neat buckets or if the killer straddled both profiles. You notice a slender card taped to the board: keeps trophies. The agent notes that many serial predators collect souvenirs: lock of hair, garment scraps, tokens to relive the crime. Rumor says Ridgway kept Polaroids of victims' faces, though none have surfaced. Fringe whispers claim he mounted snapshots on a corkboard at home, studying them like a macabre gallery. The chalkboard fills with traits: above-average intelligence, social detachment, possible necrophilic tendencies. You imagine a shadowy figure poring over crime scene photos late at night, rehearsing each step. A mainstream fact: the first published FBI profiling manual, Criminal Personality Profiling, wouldn't appear until 1983, so these agents rely on case studies of Bundy and Gacy to shape their theories. You shift your weight as they outline victim selection: vulnerable women, often last seen alone at night. The killer likely followed them from transit hubs, an insight drawn from geographic profiling, another nascent field borrowing from military strategy. You trace your finger on a map of Seattle freeways, noting clusters near truck stops and dark overpasses. An agent quotes an early profile: offender is a steady worker, possibly in a career that involves travel or physical labor, and harbors deep resentment toward women. Your mind replays media rumors that Ridgway worked at a paint factory, using his knowledge of solvents to remove trace evidence. No official subpoena ever confirmed that detail, but you picture the killer testing chemical mixes in his garage. You glance at case files showcasing handwriting samples from an anonymous letter sent to police: jagged script, misspelled words. The letter claimed the writer watched pretty girls die. Detectives debated its authenticity for weeks. Investigators still question whether it was a hoax perpetrated by a morbid prankster or a direct taunt from the murderer. On a side table, victim photos sit beneath clear plastic covers. You stare at each face, somber, hopeful, unaware of the fate to come. A small placard reads Behavioral Analysis 101. You recall that early profilers often skewed their predictions by relying heavily on urban myths, that serial killers always work alone, or that they're invariably loners living on society's fringes. In truth, nearly 1/3 of known serial murderers had stable families and outwardly normal lives. You imagine Ridgway's unremarkable exterior: a husband, a father, in sharp contrast to the gruesome secrets lurking beneath his quiet routine. Fringe theory insists he once disguised himself as a hitchhiker to lure victims, though no witness testimonies ever corroborated such ruse. The agent erases a cluster of chalk lines and replaces them with the term post-offense behavior. He explains that organized killers often return to the dump site, revisiting memory triggers. You shudder at the thought of someone tiptoeing back through tangled reeds to relive each murder moment. Unofficial chatter suggested a series of late-night animal deaths in rural Kent. Some thought the killer practiced on wildlife before moving to humans. No records confirm those incidents, but the rumor endures. A holographic projector flickers to life, casting 3D models of the riverbank onto the table. You lean over the sleek glass surface, tracking potential escape routes. The profiling team suggests the offender's vehicle is likely a common model, something that doesn't draw attention. They rule out vans and semis. Instead, they hypothesize a dark-colored Toyota or Ford sedan, blending in with commuter traffic. Suddenly, the profiling session shifts to interrogation technique. You learn that agents recommend a non-confrontational interview style, build rapport, empathize with the suspect's worldview, then gently challenge inconsistencies. You picture Gary Ridgway, seated across from you, arms folded, meeting your gaze as you feign sympathy. Could that tactic break through his defenses? Investigators still question whether such empathetic approaches risk granting a monster undue dignity or whether they're essential to peeling back layers of deception. You rub your temples as the agent outlines risk factors: childhood trauma, early animal cruelty, boredom with conventional life. They caution that these cues aren't deterministic. Most who display them never kill. Profiling is not fortune-telling, it's educated speculation. A mainstream fact: studies show criminal profiles correctly narrow suspect pools only about 14% of the time, reminding you that profiling is a guide, not gospel. As the session winds down, you realize profiling has shifted the investigation's focus from random roadblocks to targeted surveillance, stakeouts near identified hot spots, covert observation of suspects matching the profile. It's a paradigm shift, a blend of psychology and police work that will define modern manhunts. You step back from the chalkboard, scanning the array of notes, motives, methodologies, signature behaviors. Each line connects you more deeply to the killer's psyche. You realize that to catch him, you must think like him, trace his patterns, anticipate his next move. You slip into the back seat of an unmarked sedan as dusk settles over Seattle, the leather cold beneath your fingertips. Your heart hammers in your throat. Tonight, you become bait. Undercover stings have been part of law enforcement since the Prohibition era, when agents posed as bootleggers to entrap gangsters, but few operations matched the Green River Task Force's scope. Your cover identity is Tess, a solitary figure drifting between neon-lit motels and riverside trails. You wear a dark, weathered leather jacket and carry a battered tote bag stuffed with fake ID and a hidden microphone. Two uniformed officers sit ahead, eyes glued to rearview mirrors. They've rehearsed every contingency: radio codes, backup routes, binocular signals. Investigators still question whether deploying civilian decoys risked more than it saved. Some worry it exposed women to greater danger. You watch shadows lengthen along the riverbank as you step out, boots crunching on gravel. The air carries the tang of gasoline and dew-damp earth. Somewhere upstream, frogs croak against the current's murmur. You glance at the covert recorder taped to your collar and realize how small and exposed you look in this clearing. Going undercover required assembling a squad of female officers and civilian volunteers trained in self-defense and crisis de-escalation. Mainstream fact: by the early 1980s, vice squads across the U.S. had begun using decoy stings to catch serial predators, successfully nabbing at least a dozen offenders nationwide before Seattle's operation kicked off. You lean against a moss-covered tree, scanning headlights on distant roads. Every passing car could conceal him. You ring a small bell on your ankle, a silent signal to the tailing cruiser. Within minutes, a dark sedan brakes ominously, its headlights cutting swaths through mist. Your pulse spikes as its silhouette slips from the road into the underbrush. Rumor among officers held that the killer once mailed a single red rose to a previous decoy's staging motel room, a macabre thank you note that never materialized in evidence. Fringe whispers claimed he autographed it with the initials GRK, though no florist records corroborated such orders. You watch the sedan's headlights circle through the trees, then halt near a muddy bank. The passenger door clicks open. You step forward, adopting a casual swagger as you call out, "Hey, can you give me a lift?" Your voice trembles only slightly. Investigators still question whether those few seconds of hesitation could cost a life. A figure emerges, a silhouette tall, lean, movement cautious. He glides toward you, offering a hand that's steady but pale in the moonlight. You feign confidence, matching your gaze to his. The hidden mic crackles as you say, "I'm new in town, you look like you know these roads." The figure hesitates, scanning the dark water for witnesses. His breath fogs in the night air. You notice his jacket collar is worn leather, much like yours, an odd symmetry. In your peripheral vision, headlights flare, the tail car edges closer, engine idling. Mainstream fact: around that time, Seattle detectives experimented with sting operations in child abduction cases as well, borrowing tactics from Vice investigations to trap predators in undercover vehicular setups. You smile softly, leaning closer. "I'm Tess. I don't know why I'm walking out here alone, but I guess I was hoping someone would show up." Your voice is a whisper, intimate, as you brush a loose strand of hair behind your ear. He steps in, and you slip your recorder into the seat's crevice, pretending to adjust your bag. The sedan's interior smells of old upholstery and something faintly mineral, like river silt. You settle next to him, knees nearly touching. A jolt in your chest warns you, the moment of truth. You trigger your ankle bell. Instantly, taillights flash twice in acknowledgement. The officers know, you've got company. Investigators still question whether signaling so soon scared him off before incriminating remarks could be captured. In the sphere of fringe lore, some said the killer had studied counter-surveillance techniques in military manuals, a claim fueled by the immaculate lack of tire tracks or fingerprints ever found at disposal sites. You glance at him now, half expecting a practiced pivot into violence. Instead, he offers a cigarette, that pale hand steadier than yours. Your hidden mic whines softly as you murmur, "Thanks, don't see many friendly faces out here." He offers a slow nod, eyes distant. Behind you, a flashlight beam sweeps the clearing, blue and white strobing through branches. Mainstream fact: FBI decoy operations typically lasted no more than 90 minutes per deployment to minimize danger to operatives, a protocol Seattle's task force embraced carefully. You keep him talking. "You ever hike up here for the view? It's prettier than folks think." Your tone is conversational, casual. He shrugs, then asks your name again, and the recorder catches the repetition. That repetition might confirm his voice pattern. Suddenly, sirens wail in the distance. The man turns pale, mouth parting. You feign surprise and slide out of the car, palms raised. Two cruisers roll in, lights spinning crimson and sapphire across damp leaves. The figure bolts, disappearing into undergrowth. Investigators still question whether that abrupt retreat meant his guilt, or simply his caution. The officers pursue him, flashlights blurring through the fog. You stand on shaky legs, adrenaline coursing. The recording device hums in your pocket, proof that you came dangerously close. You recalibrate your breath, reminding yourself why you volunteered, to snare a ghost in human form. Later, back at the precinct, you replay the tape. Your own voice trembles, but you catch something else, a faint rasp beneath his inhale, perhaps the gravelly timbre of Gary Ridgway's speech. Yet without a name, it remains anonymous. The tape ends on a soft click, and the knowledge that stings alone couldn't fully bind the Green River Killer. You tuck the recorder into evidence, aware that every undercover try sharpened investigators' tactics, even as questions lingered. The stings taught them patience, coordination, and the chilling lesson that predators sometimes slip away at the last second, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps in the mud. The sting operations would continue for months, each deployment a roll of the dice. Sometimes decoys reported narrow escapes, other nights, nothing but silence and damp air. But each foray into the shadows taught detectives more about how he chose his victims, and how they might one day trap him. Investigators still question whether the stings ever truly cornered him, or if the killer watched their every move from hidden vantage points, adapting to every tactic thrown his way. You slip into the hushed corridor of the King County Crime Lab, where rows of metal cabinets hum with cool air and hidden promise. Under a single bulb, you watch as a technician lifts a vial of preserved evidence, semen samples, hair strands, fibers, each collected from the riverbank scenes years earlier. Your breath catches, because these faded remnants may finally outpace the killer's stealth. In 1984, Sir Alec Jeffreys in England published the first scientific paper on DNA fingerprinting, revolutionizing forensic science and giving law enforcement a powerful new tool to match suspects to biological evidence. That breakthrough echoed across the Atlantic, igniting hopes that cold cases could be thawed by genetic proof. Mainstream fact: the first official forensic use of DNA profiling in a criminal case occurred in 1987, when British police solved a double rape murder in Leicestershire. You follow the technician's gloved fingers as she extracts DNA from a tiny swatch of cloth once pressed against a victim's leg. The sample glows under UV light, an eerie luminescence that hints at the trail the killer couldn't scrub away. Fringe whispers have long circulated that Gary Ridgway meticulously laundered his clothes in industrial solvents to eradicate traces of blood, yet no forensic audit ever confirmed whether those chemical washes fully obliterated genetic clues. Investigators still question whether those early laundering rumors led them to overlook critical evidence in the lab. You lean in as the lab director calibrates the thermal cycler, its rhythmic clicks punctuating the silence. Each cycle amplifies the target DNA segment, doubling the genetic material until a distinct pattern emerges on the electrophoresis gel. You watch colored bands form like the bars of a barcode, unique, unrepeatable. Back in 1988, the FBI officially adopted the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, enabling databases to cross-reference profiles nationwide. At first, few agencies submitted profiles, and evidence sat waiting for compatible matches. For the Green River case, detectives quietly hoped that preserved samples from victims, now decades old, might yield profiles that could later be queried against suspects. You remember being told about a dusty box in a county evidence vault, hair found tangled in driftwood, fiber from a dark sedan's upholstery, scrapings from under fingernails. That box symbolized both promise and frustration, the promise of irrefutable proof, the frustration of waiting for technology to catch up. Investigators still question whether earlier sample degradation doomed some evidence before it reached the cycler. You step closer to the gel chamber as bands crystallize into view. Each lane represents a different sample, a victim, a control, an unknown. In one lane, a match pulses, identical banding between victim evidence and a swab taken from a suspect arrested for an unrelated offense. Your heart hammers, decades of silent evidence have finally spoken. By the early 1990s, police across the U.S. began revisiting cold cases, retesting evidence with DNA methods that were impossible when the crimes occurred. The Green River Task Force earmarked dozens of kit samples for reanalysis. Mainstream fact: within 5 years of CODIS's launch, over half of participating labs reported at least one case solved through DNA match, underscoring the rapid impact of genetic forensics. You imagine detectives poring over spreadsheets, cross-tabulating evidence codes against the growing list of profiles in state and national databases. They ran the Green River samples through CODIS, hopeful but cautious. Each hit could break the case or raise new questions. Investigators still question whether a partial match, one banding pattern overlapping but not identical, should have triggered a wider suspect dragnet earlier. Fringe speculation holds that Ridgway once planted false DNA from other animals at a crime scene to confuse analysts, an outlandish claim, but it fueled the killer's mystique as a forensic chameleon. No veterinary DNA ever turned up in reports, but the rumor underscored public awe at genetic sleuthing. In a sterile conference room, you join the breakthrough briefing. A forensic biologist stands before a projector, highlighting a DNA match between crime scene semen and a blood sample taken when Ridgway was arrested for solicitation in 1982. That old arrest had never been linked to the murders, until now. The biologist clicks to a slide showing the matching alleles, 8 loci perfectly aligned. Mainstream fact: by the mid-1990s, law enforcement protocols mandated that finite loci matches, then typically 6 to 8 points, were sufficient for probable cause in U.S. federal cases. The room hushes as the lead detective speaks. We have genetic confirmation. Gary Leon Ridgway is tied to at least 6 victims. We can close the loop. A thrill runs through you. The precise science that once seemed out of reach has cornered a phantom. Yet investigators still question whether focusing on one suspect's DNA overshadowed the possibility of accomplices or copycats. Could multiple offenders have mimicked his methods? You leave the room, mind buzzing with the implications. The lab's victory reverberates through precincts, prompting renewed subpoenas, search warrants, and interviews. Detectives descend upon Ridgway's past residences, armed with warrants to seize jackets, tools, and that infamous paint factory solvent. Now they have proof to turn suspicion into indictment. Outside, news crews gather, unaware that within hours, they'll buzz with bulletins of DNA confirmation linking Gary Ridgway to the atrocities once thought unsolvable. You step into the sunlight, blinking against its glare, carrying the weight of scientific triumph that casts long shadows where memories of victims linger. Investigators still question whether the science should have been deployed sooner, or if it was wise to wait for overwhelming certainty before making the arrest. As you walk away, you sense that forensic breakthroughs won't just end one man's spree, they'll reshape the entire landscape of crime solving, proving that in the long chase between predator and prey, DNA might be the final revelation. You slip through a quiet suburban street just after dusk, the streetlights flickering to life like sleepy fireflies. Every porch light glares at you, an unspoken warning: stay inside. You feel the walls of the neighborhood closing in, each shuttered window a silent sentry guarding against an unseen predator. The Green River killings aren't just riverbank horrors anymore, they've seeped into backyards and front porches, turning everyday sidewalks into gauntlets of dread. In the mid-1960s, neighborhood watch programs first took root in U.S. communities as a grassroots response to rising crime rates, a mainstream shift that empowered citizens to patrol their own streets. Now, in 1985 Seattle, that tradition mutates. You slip past a hastily scrawled sign, Neighborhood Watch, call 911 and lock your doors. Beneath it, someone spray-painted a crude tribute, an arrow pointing toward the river with the initials GRK etched in dripping letters. Investigators still question whether those vigilante patrols helped or hindered official search efforts. You pause under a flickering lamp, noting how even the air feels charged, thick with whispered rumors and the promise of midnight confrontations. A hush falls as a lone figure jogs past, glancing over his shoulder, earbuds dangling. You wonder if he's listening to battered radio reports or his own heartbeat. Word spreads that local residents have begun arming themselves, flashlights retrofitted with spikes, garden shears kept by the door, pepper spray in belt holsters. Fringe chatter claims someone assembled a makeshift nighttime posse armed with baseball bats, chanting "No more bodies on our riverbank." Though no police reports ever confirmed any formal vigilante arrests. Have you ever felt your pulse spike at the mere thought of walking home alone? You skirt a cul-de-sac lit only by moonlight, where locked cars line driveways like silent witnesses. You notice the paint on one sedan, chipped in the same pattern described in rumor threads, red primer showing through black lacquer, matching a model Ridgway once owned. Was it coincidence, or another unsettling flame fanned by fear? Across town, church groups host safety over coffee meetings in mustard yellow fellowship halls. You slip inside one, drawn by the murmur of anxious voices. Folded hands clutch steaming mugs as neighbors swap whispered tips. "I saw someone near the culvert at 2 a.m. last night, my cousin's friend swears he heard screaming by the old logging road." The murk of speculation makes every tale feel universally true. Investigators still question whether those concerned calls diverted resources from core investigations. A volunteer hands you a laminated flyer, silhouettes of a man lurking behind trees, bold text urging, report suspicious behavior, your tip could save a life. You trace the figure's contours with a fingertip, wonder how many phantom shapes have been called in mistakenly, clogging police hotlines. On the corner, a late-night diner glows with mismatched neon, pink, teal, and white. You slip inside and slide onto a stool, the vinyl seat sticky under your palm. The waitress serves coffee in chipped mugs as hushed conversations swirl around you. Theories that Ridgway once infiltrated local biker gangs to scout victims, rumors of coded graffiti in back-alley tattoo parlors linking him to dark societies. No evidence ever confirmed those subcultural ties, yet the idea fuels midnight imaginings. Do you find comfort in the caffeine's warmth, or does each sip sharpen your senses against imagined danger? You eavesdrop on patrons debating whether to form armed patrols or simply drive down to the river to shine lights along the shore. A man in a threadbare bomber jacket suggests staking out the known zones armed with cameras and walkie-talkies. A magazine on the counter features an article about night vision goggles, their grainy images like ghosts on a screen, technology out of reach for most but fueling fringe dreams of vigilante surveillance. Out on the street again, you pass a row of houses with plywood boards nailed across windows, an act of desperation against the invisible threat. Mainstream fact: studies from the 1970s show that excessive fear-driven security measures often fracture community trust, making neighbors wary of each other instead of united against crime. Yet here, every boarded window seems a fortress in miniature, each blockade both shield and prison. Investigators still question whether the community's fortress mentality drove some witnesses to stay silent rather than risk exposure. Under a street lamp, you spot an elderly man in a raincoat, hand trembling as he lights a lantern oil lamp he rigs to his front steps. He whispers, "I won't let another girl vanish," voice cracking. Fringe myths claim he once laid down decoy mannequins in the brush to bait the killer, an exercise unendorsed by any official report. How far would you go to feel safe again? Your own shadow stretches out before you, a dark companion on the sidewalk. You lift your gaze to the distant hum of sirens, a nightly lullaby for Seattle now. The city's pulse quickens at every call, every unmarked car. Even in the light of day, you hear talk of forming citizen patrols in broad daylight, armed with binoculars, vigilant watchers scanning rooftops for suspicious silhouettes. You pass a flyer plastered to a lamppost, "Green River Patrol meets here at midnight, join us." Below, an address scrawled in black marker. The ink drips slightly, as if greedily soaking in hope and fear. You take a mental step back, an invitation that feels both protective and perilous. Investigators still question whether such amateur patrols risked contaminating crime scenes or spooking potential informants. You press your palm against your chest, feeling your heartbeat thrumming like a warning drum. In neighborhoods turned fortress, you realize the true cost of fear, isolation, suspicion, and the loss of ordinary rhythms. No porch light can keep out nightmares, and no patrol can guarantee safety when the terror strikes out of sight. As you fade into the mundane glow of a 24-hour grocery store, you carry the hush of vigilante whispers and locked doors with you, a reminder that when justice seems distant, fear fills the void. And in that void, the silent predator still prowls. You slip into the back seat of an unmarked surveillance van parked 2 blocks from the suspect's home, the engine's low hum blending with the distant drip of a broken gutter. Headlights from passing cars carve brief triangles of light across the interior, illuminating dusty case files strewn on the dashboard. Tonight, you watch a man emerge from his porch, tall, shoulders hunched under a worn denim jacket. He lights a cigarette and exhales a plume of smoke into the chill air. You feel the thrill of recognition. This could be the face that's haunted your dreams. In 1985, geoprofiling, using victims' disposal sites to predict a killer's home base, was just beginning to influence manhunts, thanks to British criminologist Kim Rossmo's early work. Seattle detectives mapped the Green River dump sites and noticed a cluster of heat around Kent and Auburn, guiding them to monitor residents in that radius. Mainstream fact: Rossmo's formal formula wouldn't be published until 1997, but his geographic insights were already seeping into police conferences by the late 1980s. You swivel your head toward the single-lens camera aimed through the tinted window, tracking the man as he glances over his shoulder. A red taillight wink betrays the unmarked car tailing him, your ride. You brush a loose strand of hair from your face and steady your hands on the vinyl seat. Investigators still question whether relying on geographic clusters might have focused attention on the wrong neighborhoods early on. The man drops his cigarette into a stubby glass ashtray by the front door, then disappears inside. You click on night vision goggles and peer through the windshield. The porch light flickers, revealing flowering ivy climbing the brick facade, an odd burst of life against the otherwise drab block. Fringe whispers among detectives say he once used ivy vines to string victims' clothing as grim banners, though no crime scene reports mention foliage. Inside the van, you leaf through a witness statement. A jogger months ago spotted a similar denim jacket near a riverbank at dawn. She described a gait too measured to be casual, like someone pacing before a hunt. That tip had once lodged in a preliminary profile but was dismissed for lack of forensic proof. You tap a finger on the street map where the suspect's home intersects with a bus route he reportedly used after night shifts at a local paint factory. Rumor had it that the factory's solvent fumes dulled his senses to the smell of decomposition, a fringe theory never corroborated by lab tests but retold in dark coffee shop corners. Your partner, crouched by the open side door, hand poised over a notepad, scribbles the suspect's license plate as the man's headlights blink off. You glance at the plate and commit the numbers to memory, a key to subpoenas and warrants yet to come. Mainstream fact: the FBI's National Crime Information Center, NCIC, had begun digitizing license plate alerts in 1983, allowing patrol cars to query plates instantly, an innovation Seattle PD was now leveraging to flag the suspect's vehicle during checkpoint sweeps. You flick off the goggles and watch as two officers in plainclothes emerge from a side alley, slipping through the chain-link fence behind the suspect's yard. Their footsteps are muffled by fallen leaves, every crunch threatens to betray them. Investigators still question whether that fence crawl lacked the legal grounds for a proper search warrant, forcing them to rely on visual surveillance only. Inside the van, you adjust the binoculars' focus on an upstairs window. A faint glow from a desk lamp illuminates a cluttered bookshelf, rows of technical manuals, law enforcement journals, and a single tattered crime novel. You wonder if he studied police procedure as meticulously as he dismembered bodies. The man reappears at the window, his silhouette rigid. He pauses, hand lifted as if pressing against an unseen barrier, then turns away. You catch his face in profile, angular cheekbones, a straight nose, eyes that reflect the lamp's glow. Your throat tightens. This is the moment you shift from theory to person. A chirp from the radio crackles, plate clear, no wants or warrants. You frown, a minor relief flickers. Yet absence of records doesn't equal innocence. His transcendent anonymity is what allowed him to lurk undetected for years. You leaf through internal memos, each redacted line a reminder of stolen years, memos urging more surveillance, requests for fingerprint analysis on a cigarette but found near a late victim, and a cross-reference suggesting the suspect's name matched payroll logs at an abandoned logging site where bodies once surfaced. Investigators still question whether payroll records should have triggered an earlier background check. The heels of nearby officers click across the porch, and you glimpse movement beyond the fence, a flashlight beam catching the ridge of a rose trellis. You jolt upright, binoculars digging into your palms. A third plainclothes detective appears at the backyard gate, ducking behind a hedge. You whisper into a throat mic, "Team moving in." The radio hums back, "Copy that. Proceed on my mark." Your pulse rattles each word. They advance, circling the house in silence until the front door's knob clicks, a muted herald of confrontation. Only a sliver of second before the door opens, and the suspect steps out, squinting at flashlights. The officers hold fire, hands at their sides. Mainstream fact: in the late 1980s, police were cautioned against no-knock entries without clear evidence of imminent threat, a policy shift born from high-profile raids gone wrong. You watch the suspect's eyes scan the assembled faces, calm, curious, entirely unreadable. You lean forward, straining to hear his first words. Fringe gossip among retired detectives claimed Ridgway once greeted officers with a courteous good evening before being handcuffed, so composed that he seemed almost cordial. No official transcript quotes confirm that exchange, but the lore survives. He steps back as officers read him his rights, his gaze drifts upward, pausing on the ivy you saw earlier. For a fleeting moment, you see the faintest twitch at his temple: surprise, amusement, regret. Then he is guided toward the open van door, wrists masked by zip ties. Investigators still question whether that observed twitch signaled genuine remorse or a predator's self-control. You step forward, hand outstretched as if to touch the man you've hunted in shadow. Rain begins to patter on the van's roof, each drop a soft percussion on the vinyl. You realize how small his frame looks now, no longer the phantom at the river's edge, but a person with a face, a voice, and a story of terror. As they lead him away, the cameras click, flashbulbs stutter, and murmurs ripple through the assembled crowd. You remain seated, absorbing the significance. The phantom is captured. The outline you sketched from maps and profiles has become flesh and blood. Outside, the night breathes around you, the van's engine humming low. You know the arrest won't end the nightmares. There are still bodies waiting to be identified, families waiting for closure. But tonight, the silhouette by the riverbank finally has a name. And you, perched in this surveillance van, feel the weight of every breath you took watching him walk free in your mind, until this exact moment. You step out of the squad car into the sting of bright floodlights that paint the precinct's facade in stark relief, your breath visible in the chill air. Handcuffs click around his wrists, metal kisses that echo in the hush. The suspect's posture doesn't break. He meets your gaze with a steady calm, as if he's merely another man caught on a bad night rather than the architect of decades of terror. In 1966, the Supreme Court's landmark Miranda v. Arizona decision mandated that all suspects in custody be informed of their rights before interrogation, a rule engraved into every officer's training since. Tonight, the lieutenant recites the familiar script: you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You watch the suspect nod once, almost imperceptibly, as if he's heard the speech countless times in true crime podcasts, detached, rehearsed. Your fingers brush the folder in your hand, photographs of the riverbanks, crime scene notes, pages of his financial records showing solitary paint powder purchases. He's led past booking cubicles, each stamped with dates of lesser criminals, shoplifters, brawlers, drifters, none with a record that looms this large. You hear the distant click of fingerprints rolling, a mechanical lullaby of evidence locked in ink. Investigators still question whether that classic Reed technique, dating back to the 1940s, encourages confrontational tactics that risk false admissions under pressure. Inside, the walls are mirror-smooth and cream-colored, illuminated by a single fluorescent bulb that hums above. The table between you and him bears only a recorder, its red light blinking, a silent judge. You place the riverbank photos face down, letting curiosity coil. He sinks into the vinyl chair opposite you, leather squeaking under his weight. Fringe whispers once claimed Ridgway tapped Morse code on interrogation room walls with his wedding band, an odd flourish of mastery over the moment, though no official notes mention such tapping. Your partner clicks the recorder on. The flat tone of its beep vibrates through the silence. You pour 2 cups of lukewarm coffee, one for you, one untouched, steam curling upward like a ghost. The suspect's eyes flick to the cups, then back to you. You offer him one. He declines with a slight lift of his chin, lips pressed in a thin line. You open with a gentle approach. You know why you're here. Your voice is low, measured. He nods once. His collar is dusted with river silt, tiny grains that escaped even the most thorough decontamination. You slide a photo onto the table, face up, a young woman in a mall jacket, eyes bright. She was 22. Her name was Wendy Caulfield. He does not flinch. Instead, he studies the picture, lips curling into something like a faint smile, condescension or nostalgia, you can't tell. Mainstream fact: FBI studies show that suspects who exhibit minimal emotional fluctuation during image-based questioning are often veterans of evasion tactics. You lean forward. She trusted you enough to get into your car. Your hand hovers above the photo. Tell me what happened that night. Silence stretches, taut as guitar string, until he exhales, voice low and even. She wanted a ride. I gave her a ride. Then she was sorry. He shrugs. Investigators still question whether his monotone recounting is a shield or a confession in disguise. You shift tactics, raising the volume of your empathy. Wendy wasn't the only one. You lost count near 50. Why her? Why any of them? His eyes flick away, brief, almost human. He leans back, arms crossing, the leather chair creaking. They were there. His words trail off into the rumble of the air conditioning. The recorder whirs softly. You recall that by the early 1980s, criminal interview protocols began emphasizing rapport building, asking open-ended questions to prompt more detail. You try it. When you saw her on that road, what did you feel? He studies a vent on the ceiling, lips moving as if weighing the vocabulary of emotion. Nothing, he says. She was just another body. His tone is clinical, detached, an echo of forensic report. Fringe rumor says Ridgway once brought souvenirs into interviews, a lock of hair or a victim's earring, forcing detectives to wrestle with their own revulsion. No mementos appear tonight, but the rumor hangs in the stale air. You press the edge of the folder to his knuckles. These were their lives. You gesture to the photographs stacked. Girl after girl. He lifts his gaze, calm, calculating. They knew what they were risking. Investigators still question whether admitting that line reflects genuine belief or a predator's mocking bravado. You click off the recorder, letting the final click echo. He watches you pack away the photos, then uncrosses his legs and stands. The chair rolls back. He moves toward the door. You rise too, blocking his path. One more thing, you say softly. He stops, hand on the knob. Did you ever feel remorse? He pauses, fingertip brushing the metal. His voice is nearly a whisper. Remorse is for people who believe in forgiveness. He steps into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving you with the hum of the recorder and the faint scent of coffee. Outside, officers shuffle paperwork. The suspect's gait echoes in your mind as he was led away in cuffs, controlled, composed, a phantom in denim. You wonder how many times he's walked free in his mind before surrendering tonight. Investigators still question whether darkness is ever truly interrogated, or only held at bay by fleeting flashes of questioning light. You switch off the overhead bulb, plunging the room into shadow. The recorder's red light dims and vanishes. On the table, only your coffee cup remains, cold and half-finished. You gather your notes, the hush of hallway footsteps guiding you back into the precinct's pulse. You trudge along the polished wood floor of the federal courthouse, sliding into a seat near the back of the courtroom. A hush fills the air, lawyers, press, families, and advocates perched on benches, cameras off, silent witnesses to what is about to unfold. Above you, the ornate ceiling fresco looms like an indifferent sky, its muted cherubs frozen in flight. The judge, robed in solemn black, studies the room from behind a raised bench, gavel resting like a punctuation mark of finality. You shift in your seat, fingertips tracing the grain of the pew, catching the eye of a victim's relative whose shoulders tremble ever so slightly. In U.S. courts today, more than 90% of federal criminal cases are resolved through plea bargains, a statistic that underscores how modern justice often hinges on negotiated confessions rather than jury verdicts. This hearing, held on December 18, 2003, marked one of the most staggering plea agreements in serial murder history, 49 counts of murder in exchange for life sentences rather than capital punishment. As the prosecutor clears his throat, Gary Ridgway rises from the defense table. You lean forward, noticing the weary slump of his shoulders and the crease of resignation on his face. He places a stack of photographs and case files on the lectern. The recorder's red light begins to blink. Then, in a voice so even you could mistake it for polite small talk, he says, "I want to plead guilty to all 54 counts." Your pulse spikes as the courtroom gasps. He pauses, sliding his reading glasses into his pocket. "I have confessed to taking their lives," he continues, "and I accept the consequences." The syllables land like stones in still water. You feel a shiver run through you as he recites each name: Wendy Caulfield, Laurie McCarty, an echoing litany of women whose lives ended far too soon. His tone never wavers, there's no tremor of regret, only the cold precision of a man reciting a dossier. He admits to approaching victims in his truck, driving them to remote spots, then strangling them with bare hands or cord. He describes the disposal of bodies with bureaucratic detachment: "I release them in shallow water to slow decomposition." Mainstream fact: the use of victim-specific disposal methods was later classified as a signature behavior, differentiating personal motive from mere convenience. A hushed murmur ripples through the gallery as Ridgway reveals the final tally of his confirmed murders: 71 women, the highest number for any American serial killer at that time. His admission of 71 exceeds the original 54 charges, a testament to the complexity of cold case investigations. You glance at a chart displayed on a screen to the side, each dot representing a life ended. The dots stretch across 2 decades, mapping a trail of loss. Fringe rumor once whispered that Ridgway kept miniature dioramas of the riverbank in a homemade dollhouse, populating it with tiny figures he crafted from scavenged stick fragments, though investigators never uncovered any such models. Investigators still question whether his full confession accurately accounts for all victims or if memory lapses, guilt, or strategic motives shaped the numbers he chose to disclose. You watch the families in the front row as some weep softly while others sit rigid as statues. A mother clasps a framed photograph of her daughter to her chest, lip trembling. The stark contrast between Ridgway's calm demeanor and the raw grief in their eyes tightens your throat. After the hearing, you step into a corridor lit by fluorescent bulbs, the pop of shoe heels counting time against the tile floor. Reporters ask hurried questions, but you slip past them, clutching a press card that suddenly feels heavy. You realize that his confessions, while closing many open investigations, also opened new wounds, forcing every survivor and investigator to relive each atrocity. Mainstream fact: psychological studies indicate that serial offenders who confess in detail often do so to gain a sense of control over their narrative, aligning with patterns observed in other high-profile cases. You lean against a wall lined with laminated binders, each case file a testament to methodical exhumations and DNA confirmations. Volunteers map floral tributes at rendezvous points while chaplains offer quiet prayers amid antiseptic drawers of bone fragments and tattered clothing. The hush of those vaults yields to the solemn rustle of paper and the measured hum of fluorescent lights. On December 18, 1 year after his guilty plea, you join a small gathering at the river's edge for a memorial service. The sun sets behind tally marks carved into driftwood, each notch representing a name spoken aloud in hushed requiem. Mourners stand clustered around wooden benches, lit by flickering lanterns, reciting remembered laughter alongside unreadable tears. Family members release white balloons into the dark sky, their strings cutting silent arcs above the water. You feel a chill as the first balloon drifts beyond sight, carrying an echo of a life that ended too soon. A local musician strums a soft melody on a guitar, strings vibrating against the low roar of the river. The sound mingles with the convocation of names: Sally, Dorothy, Marie. Each syllable a prayer. You push open the heavy mahogany doors of the King County Superior Court and step onto the polished terrazzo floor, your footsteps echoing in the hushed chamber. The overhead skylights diffuse sunlight into gentle pools on the jury benches, casting elongated silhouettes of law clerks and bailiffs. You feel the crystalline chill of anticipation settle around you. After years of confessions and forensic breakthroughs, this trial will stage the killer under a public microscope. Reporters clutch notepads near the gallery's edge, while attorneys adjust ties and drape gowns over shoulders. In the silence before opening statements, you sense how a courtroom transforms from temple of justice into theater of dread. You settle into a creaking wooden pew, watching as the bailiff calls the court to order in a voice that seems to vibrate through the oak-paneled walls. Cameras positioned behind glass portholes click and whir, capturing every flinch and raised eyebrow as the judge enters. Legal pads rest on front-row tables, stacked like battle plans in watercolor folders. A row of water glasses sweats in the court reporter's hand, awaiting testimony. You notice the gallery's air hums with fevered whispers, some recounting old rumors of unsolved victims, others clutching glossy programs listing the day's cast, defense team, district attorney, and the man in denim now officially known as defendant. You shift forward, heart drumming against your ribs, as the bailiff announces, "All rise." Do you feel the tension tighten like an invisible noose? In measured tones, the district attorney rises to deliver opening statements, his voice a calm tide of accusation. He unfurls a timeline of bodies discovered from 1982 to 1998, invoking crime scene photos like chapters in a grim novel. You lean in as he describes serrated marks on ribs, fibers in fingernails, each fragment weaving a tether to the defendant. Then the lead defense attorney stands, smooth in charcoal suit, appealing to jurors' empathy. These confessions came after years of coercion and fractured memory, she intones, her eyes scanning the jury as if mapping each heartbeat. You sense the tactical dance, prosecution presses raw evidence, defense counters with doubts about reliability. What unseen legal tightrope are they attempting to cross? Next, a parade of witnesses threads before the jury, former detectives recalling breathless nights on the riverbank, forensic technicians detailing hair analysis and chain of custody protocols. You watch a lead investigator's knuckles widen as he replays the first time he saw a victim's face laid out on a morgue table. A forensic pathologist steps up, voice muffled by mask, recounting the circular bruises and ligature impressions left by bare hands. You feel each syllable roll in your chest, an anatomical symphony of violence. Then a grieving relative rises, tear-streaked and trembling, to describe a daughter's final phone call, an innocent goodnight turned into permanent silence. Throughout, the gallery's corners harbor whispers of cameras forbidden inside. Post-Shepard v. Maxwell rulings in 1966 limited courtroom photography to safeguard fair trials, yet cell phone snaps slipped out in the early 2000s, leaking online blurbs before mistrial motions could be filed. Mainstream fact, by the time Ridgway's trial commenced, most cameras were barred from the courtroom, leading to sketch artists capturing every furtive glance and oily tear. You find yourself watching one sketch artist with binoculars, her charcoal smudges render the defendant's calm gaze with uncanny accuracy. Fringe chatter among reporters suggests legal clerks passed behind-the-scenes transcripts to bloggers, dribbling hints about surprise eyewitnesses. Investigators still question whether leaked lines shaped jury bias before closing arguments. As walls lined with exhibit boards rotate, you watch the prosecution unveil gruesome crime scene photographs projected in muted sepia, mud-caked layers peeled back to reveal fragments of hair, pieces of cord, and despair immortalized in still frames. The defense counters by sequestering jurors for private viewings in a side room, arguing that repeated exposure to blood-smeared images risks causing emotional distress and bypassing objective reason. You imagine the jurors, blinking at the flickering screen, caught between empathy and analysis. A court-appointed psychologist cautions that trauma triggers can impair decision-making, a fact rooted in 1980s research on victim impact testimony. You shift in your chair, heart thrumming, as a technician wheels in a table of seized artifacts, paint cans, oil sponges, and Ridgway's battered hammer. After days of riveting arguments, the jury retreats to a stark deliberation room, an echo chamber of tension, the door's steel hinges squealing like whispered warnings. Jurors flip through dozens of exhibit binders as a dietary menu remains untouched, the prospect of pizza and coffee overshadowed by the gravity of their task. A bell chimes for the 7th time since dawn, marking each hour's passing. You wonder, in that silent crucible, how do 5 women and 7 men reconcile mercy with justice? Eventually, the jury files back into the courtroom. You join them in the tense hush as the bailiff intones, "Have you reached a verdict?" You watch hands clasp, eyes fix on the foreperson's lips. The foreperson stands, trembling, voice quavering. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. A collective exhale ripples, some bodies slump, others jump with relief. Cameras behind glass shutters blink in silent applause. You feel the courtroom's collective pulse shift, as if the air itself exerts the weight of every life lost. Do you dare release your own held breath, knowing the killer's doom has been sealed by 12 strangers' verdict? As the judge pronounces life sentences without parole, you sense a long hush settle over the benches. Outside, media vans roar to life like startled beasts. You step onto the courthouse steps, lungs filling with the crisp Seattle air, freedom tainted by the ache of justice served too late. In the glare of midday sun, you notice a band of yellow ribbons fluttering near the entrance, each tied to a memory. You walk away, carrying the echoes of courtroom drama in your mind, a theater of law where shadows of victims met the bright glare of accountability. You find yourself standing at the crest of a gentle slope overlooking the Green River, dusk settling in violet hues across the water. A circle of folding chairs has been arranged beneath a lone maple tree, its leaves trembling in the cooling breeze. You settle into one of the seats, feeling the rough fabric against your palms as neighbors, clergy, and survivors gather to honor lives lost. Each person holds a single white rose, petals unblemished, a fragile promise of remembrance. A hush falls as a community elder steps forward, voice steady and low. Tonight, we name them again. He pauses, then calls out, one by one, the names of the 50 women confirmed in this case. You watch their petals drift onto a wooden table, each bloom laid beside a framed photograph. Mainstream fact: in 1994, the National Center for Victims of Crime formalized guidelines encouraging community remembrance ceremonies, recognizing their healing power for survivors and witnesses alike. Investigators still question whether public memorials help families heal or extend their grief by re-exposing raw wounds. You lean forward, tracing the line of vapor from your breath as the elder speaks of hope forged in solidarity. Behind him, volunteers light candles in simple glass jars, their flames flickering reflections on the rippling river below. The candlelight dances like watchful eyes, guarding memories against the dark. A young woman with a tremor in her voice steps to a microphone. My sister adored pop music, she says, tilting her chin toward the river. She would have laughed at us, holding roses at a riverside vigil. You catch her eye as she sets a rose beside her sister's photo, vibrant petals against the smooth stone. Fringe whispers claim that Ridgway sometimes arranged flowers on victim graves in a twisted tribute, yet no cemetery records corroborate floral offerings linked to his crimes. Do you feel the weight of those rumors, how they blur fact and fear? You shift in your seat as a local historian recites the evolution of riverfront communities, from logging routes in the early 1900s to the industrial boom of the 1970s. He reminds everyone that rivers have always borne witness to human stories, both life-giving and lethal. Mainstream fact: Seattle area riverfronts saw a 30% rise in recreational use from 1980 to 1990, a surge that ironically provided more potential witnesses yet fewer patrols at night. Next, a survivor advocate reads a poem she wrote in honor of the victims, a quiet incantation of names woven into lines of water and wind. The words ripple across the gathering, drawing tears and nods of recognition. You feel the cadence in your chest, the hush it leaves behind. Investigators still question whether art-based memorials provide catharsis or simply refocus trauma into new forms of grief. Behind you, children press faces against glass jars holding lit candles, their small flags fluttering, hand-painted memories. I miss your smile, thank you for dancing with me. You notice their earnest faces illuminated by the glow, innocence defying the chilling history surrounding them. A chaplain steps forward for a closing prayer, voice soft as ripples, may these waters carry our sorrow into strength. The group bows heads, you feel the hush deepen as the river's murmur settles into the background. Each heartbeat seems amplified in that silence. Mainstream fact: faith leaders in many communities introduced interfaith vigils in the early 1990s to welcome diverse expressions of mourning, reflecting a growing understanding that grief transcends doctrine. You take a step toward the water's edge, cradling your rose. The maple's branches scratched the sky overhead, as if reaching for every whispered memory. You drop your bloom into the current, it floats a moment before drifting away, petals skimming the surface. Nearby, a volunteer passes out small river stones engraved with names, tokens to carry onward. You accept one, tracing the faded letters with your thumb, Sandra. The cool stone warms in your hand, weighty with remembrance. Fringe stories tell of survivors scattering engraved stones along remote banks to guide future searchers, yet official task force reports make no note of clandestine markers. Investigators still question whether such unsanctioned acts ever interfered with formal search efforts or simply offered solace to those who felt powerless. You lean against the maple's sturdy trunk, cradling the engraved stone and the echo of the ceremony. In the distance, city lights begin to twinkle, and you remember that life beyond this circle carries on, each car passing on the nearby road oblivious to the vigil below. As you turn away, voices rise again, not in sorrow, but in a vow: we remember. We protect. We light the way. You join in the final chorus, a whispered promise against gathering dark. You walk back up the slope, the maple's silhouette behind you, carrying the stone in your pocket and the vigil's hush in your heart. The community's act of remembrance lingers in your bones, fragile, unbreakable, a testament that even on the river's cold banks, hope can bloom. You step through the glass doors of the Seattle Conference Center, the hum of chatter and projector clicks washing over you like a tide. Banners proclaim Serial Crime Symposium, lessons and innovations, and you feel the weight of decades slung across your shoulders, because tonight, you're here to witness the Green River Killer's aftershocks echo through modern policing. Inside the exhibit hall, booths line the periphery, federal agencies showcasing DNA sequencers, tech startups unveiling crime scene drones, non-profit advocates distributing pamphlets on victim support. You drift past a display on multi-jurisdictional task forces, reading how, in 2004, the Department of Justice began formally funding collaborative units that cross county and state lines, an innovation spurred directly by the challenges highlighted in the Green River investigation. Mainstream fact: the Green River case prompted the creation of the Western States Homicide Investigators Association, reinforcing cross-agency communication and training courses for serial crime detection. Investigators still question whether such formal alliances dilute local expertise or genuinely streamline information flow. You pause at a kiosk where a silent video loop shows historic crime scene photographs morphing into CAD reconstructions, each frame captioned with a decade since Ridgway's arrest. The digital display credits the case with accelerating adoption of Geographic Information Systems, GIS, in policing, plotting dumping sites, mapping offender movement, and predicting future risk zones. Fringe lore insists the killer once studied those same riverbank maps, penciling escape routes in the margins of a high school atlas, though no student records corroborate that he ever owned one. A panel discussion is about to begin in the adjacent theater. You slip into a seat near the back, the orange auditorium glow warming your cheeks. Law enforcement historians and forensic pioneers take the stage. The moderator mentions that, prior to the Green River case, DNA cold case reviews were rare, now they're a cornerstone of homicide units worldwide. Mainstream fact: as of 2025, over 500 cold cases have been solved using DNA retesting protocols first expanded after high-profile cases like Green River. Investigators still question whether an over-reliance on DNA sidelines crucial witness interviews that might otherwise crack cases. On stage, a retired detective recounts how the killer's lengthy evasion exposed gaps in missing person databases. In the early 1980s, some jurisdictions archived runaways separately, leaving sex worker disappearances unconnected. His voice cracks as he recalls pleading for integrated data systems. Today, many police agencies share real-time alerts through centralized platforms, an evolution he credits to lessons learned from fragmented reports in the Green River investigation. A forensic scientist stands, describing how the case's sheer volume of victim evidence spurred the FBI to expand its combined DNA index system, CODIS. She notes that the lab workload tripled between 2001 and 2005, forcing upgrades in automation and sample tracking software. Mainstream fact: Following the Green River breakthrough, the FBI allocated $25 million to modernize crime labs nationwide, reducing DNA processing times from months to mere weeks. Investigators still question whether speed compromises quality control in high-pressure labs. You slip out of the theater and wander into the community engagement zone, where victim advocacy groups host roundtables. A banner reads "From Grief to Action," and you hear a panelist share how the case galvanized changes in victim impact legislation. In 2008, Congress passed the Crime Victims' Rights Act, guaranteeing survivors entitlement to information and participation in proceedings, reforms many families demanded after feeling sidelined during the lengthy Green River saga. Nearby, a startup demos AI-powered scent detection devices aimed at locating human remains. The presenter beams as she cites peer-reviewed studies linking cadaver detection dogs' accuracy improvements to training protocols tested during riverbank searches. Fringe speculation holds that Ridgway once used solvent-infused towels to hide odor trails, an urban myth that fueled interest in chemical sensors despite scant empirical support. Investigators still question whether untested technologies distract from proven methods like grid searches and trained canine units. You head into a breakout room labeled Media and Perception. A journalist leads a workshop on responsible true crime reporting. She challenges attendees: did sensational headlines during the Green River Frenzy aid investigations, or did they stoke panic? You feel the hush of that tension, recalling how 1983 news bulletins flooded police hotlines with tips, both credible and bogus, clogging critical lines of inquiry. Mainstream fact: media-generated tips accounted for less than 5% of viable leads, according to a 2005 after-action report. Investigators still question whether withholding graphic details could yield more focused cooperation from the public. You drift to the hallway cafe for a glass of water. As you sip, a young analyst slides into the seat across from you, eyes alight. She shows you her laptop, an interactive dashboard tracking serial offender patterns nationwide. She points out a cluster overlay that flags potential copycat crimes, a tool developed in part because investigators feared a Green River copycat might emerge after Ridgway's arrest. Fringe rumor claimed multiple copycats did surface, faking signatures like floral petals on victims, though no confirmed cases matched his disposal style. Back in the main hall, an attorney hosts a session on sentencing reforms. He references how Ridgway's plea deal, avoiding the death penalty in exchange for full confessions, sparked debates on capital punishment's efficacy. Mainstream fact: since 2003, over a dozen U.S. states have re-examined death penalty statutes for serial murder, influenced by plea bargain precedents set in the Green River case. Investigators still question whether plea deals sacrifice justice for expedience or create pathways to truth that trials can't. You wander toward the exit, the final booths dimming as teardown crews prepare. You pause at a display of archival artifacts, a battered cassette recorder used in the 2001 interrogation, a yellowed map pinned with evidence markers, and a leather binder stamped Green River Task Force. You run your fingers over the glass, tangible proof that one man's crimes reshaped an entire system. Stepping into the dusk, the city skyline glimmers. You think of the river's quiet stretch behind you, a silent witness to both horror and healing. The symposium's lights fade, but the legacy persists. DNA labs hum faster, data flows across borders, and communities hold ceremonies to remember. Yet you know the work never ends. Every innovation carries its own questions, every triumph shadows another uncertainty. Investigators still question whether systems built in response to one killer can withstand the next. You zip your jacket, hearing the distant roar of traffic and the faint, familiar murmur of water. In that lingering hush, you carry the truth: change is born from tragedy, but its impact rests on vigilance. And as you walk away, you realize that the Green River Killer's legacy, like the river itself, will continue to shape currents for generations to come. You exit the conference center into the cool dusk air, the city lights of Seattle glimmering like distant constellations. The symposium's buzz still echoes in your mind: DNA breakthroughs, GIS mapping, victim advocacy reforms, but now you step into a quieter terrain, the long aftermath. You feel the weight of every life lost settling into the stones beneath your feet, because when the headlines fade and the courtrooms empty, the ripples of trauma and unanswered questions endure. In neighborhoods along the Green River, families still mark anniversaries with quiet rituals. Some gather at living room tables, opening letters from lost loved ones, others return to riverside benches, tracing water's path as a meditative act of remembrance. Mainstream fact: the Crime Victims' Rights Act of 2004 granted survivors legal standing to receive timely notice of proceedings and to be heard at sentencing, a reform many families credit to their experiences during the Green River saga. Investigators still question whether procedural reforms fully address the emotional aftermath or merely offer legal acknowledgement. You picture counselors in pastel offices guiding survivors through labyrinthine grief, teaching breathing exercises to tame panic's tide. You imagine support groups where spouses share silent nods, each nod a lifeline cast across unspoken horrors. Fringe whispers suggest some families commission private investigators to scour remote brush for covert graves, convinced not all victims were ever recovered, though official reviews found no credible evidence of additional sites. Do you feel the tension between hope and lingering doubt? Across the country, police departments maintain cold case units, staffed by detectives obsessed with unfinished stories. You envision walls lined with outdated mugshots and yellowing case files, each file a plea for resolution. Mainstream fact: by 2015, more than 70% of U.S. law enforcement agencies had established dedicated cold case squads, often inspired by high-profile cases like Green River. Investigators still question whether cold case units divert resources from active investigations or serve as vital avenues for justice delayed. You reflect on forensic classrooms where students study Ridgway's case as a cautionary tale, how early evidence degradation nearly thwarted DNA identification, and how interdisciplinary collaboration finally broke the silence. You sense the hum of centrifuges and the click of pipette tips, instruments of renewal born from past failure. Community memorials persist, plaques embedded in riverside promenades, sculptures etched with names, and annual vigils where roses drift downstream. You imagine petals carried by currents as messages from the living to the lost. Mainstream fact: since the late 1990s, over 50 U.S. cities have erected public memorials honoring serial crime victims, reflecting a societal shift toward collective commemoration. Investigators still question whether public remembrance prevents forgetting or continually reopens fresh wounds. Meanwhile, debates swirl about the ethics of true crime media, documentaries that re-examine the case, podcasts that replay victims' last calls, dramatizations that embellish details for suspense. You ask yourself, does narrating these stories educate or exploit? Fringe commentary on niche forums contends that unauthorized reenactments sometimes distort timelines, weaving fictional scenes into factual frames, though mainstream producers insist on rigorous fact-checking. Have you ever wondered where the line falls between illumination and intrusion? As you walk along the riverbank walkway, floodlights glow against the water's surface, evening joggers pass with headphones, unaware of the river's dark legacy beneath their feet. You feel the hush of the current, carrying echoes of whispers, names spoken in darkness, questions left unresolved. You reach a bench overlooking a quiet stretch of water. You sit, trace the grain of the wood with your fingertips, and realize the case's true legacy isn't just forensic advancements or legal reforms, it's the endurance of memory in the face of silence. The ripple of a boat's oar, the murmur of a passing train, the indistinct laughter of children playing nearby, all become part of a living tapestry that keeps the victims present. Investigators still question whether any system can fully capture the complexity of human loss or if some stories remain forever beyond closure. You lean back, closing your eyes to the night's symphony, water lapping, leaves rustling, distant traffic humming a lullaby of normalcy. And in that hush, you understand, the shadow of the Green River Killer has stretched beyond the riverbanks, weaving itself into the very fabric of justice, memory, and the human heart. Now the torrent of details slows to a gentle stream. The city's glow recedes to a distant shimmer, and you feel weight in your limbs, a welcome release from tension. The river at your feet no longer seems ominous but steady, timeless, its currents a soft reminder that life flows on. Your heartbeat finds a new rhythm, slow as water winding through gravel, each pulse a quiet affirmation of existence. Above you, stars pepper the sky with soft pinpricks of light, like distant memories guiding you forward. You breathe in the night's cool hush, the fragrant earth after rain, the crisp whisper of leaves, the distant call of a night bird. Each sensation is an anchor, pulling you gently back to the present moment, reminding you that you are here, safe, aware, and able to witness. Allow yourself to feel gratitude for the small miracles, the bench beneath you, the soft cushion of grass underfoot, the gentle murmur of water. These are not mere backdrops to a dark history, but testaments to resilience and renewal. In every rustle of reeds, find a lullaby, in every twinkle overhead, a promise of dawn. Let your mind unfurl like ripples on glassy water, each thought softening into stillness. If questions linger, about justice served or gaps unfilled, let them drift away for now on the river's tide. Trust that tomorrow brings new light, new clarity, and new courage to face what remains unresolved. Feel the cool breeze brush your cheek, a tender touch of solace. The world may hold shadows, but it also harbors warmth, in shared stories, in acts of kindness, in the hush between heartbeats. Now, close your eyes and let your breath guide you into calm reverie. May the night cradle you in its quiet embrace, and may you wake with the